What's up, everybody? So, a lot of you have been asking me, how do I send a Dropbox to a client? Meaning, what type of setup do I have where I can send a client a machine, they just plug it in, and I can connect to that machine remotely? We use this a lot for internal penetration testing, or in theory, you could use this if you wanted to set up a Dropbox for a client site, meaning something malicious like you were doing a physical pen test and you bypass security and then you just drop this, for example, on a Pi or some small device. But I actually use this on a laptop. So just depending on how you want to use this. And the way I'm going to show you is not the all-inclusive way. There's a million different ways to do this. This is just the way I do this. You could just as easily have like a Windows machine or whatever machine and then use something like Log Me In or any of those type of remote desktop services or VNC or whatever you want to use. But I utilize Kali Linux on Metal, meaning I install it on the machine itself. And then I take that and I just have it connect home to a VPN server, which is an OpenVPN server. That OpenVPN actually lives in the cloud. I use Azure. So what I'm going to show you today is how to set up a OpenVPN server and then how to utilize that configuration file to go ahead and just put that on a Kali Linux machine. And then that Kali Linux machine should talk back automatically, and then you should be good to go. So you can actually do this for free. I'm logged into the Facebook hackspleasesir@gmail.com. And you could come here and you can just go ahead and say, hey, I want to start a free trial. You click into this, and it brings you to this page where you get 12 months of free products, $200 credit, and there are no automatic charges. So you do have to verify by phone or by card. And when you do that, you supply your information, but you will not be charged unless you say, hey, I want to move forward with Azure. So what we're going to do is go ahead and sign up if you don't have an Azure account. Get signed up, make sure you're confirmed, and then meet me back, or just watch the video and see how we set it up. And you could set it up in AWS. You could set it up wherever you want. You could even set it up at home if that's how you want to do this. But I'm going to use Azure just as a safe space, a free space, and we can kind of move forward from there. So before we begin, I do have this little Dropbox setting, and I've just got it basically set up for a Word document where I say, hey, here's my install checklist, here's how we install OpenVPN, and then here's my Dropbox checklist. Now, some of this was for 2019.3. In today's video, we're going to use 2019.4 of Kali Linux, because in order to install RDP, we had to do some cleanup, but actually now it's been changed where we don't have to disable the GNOME settings that we had before. It's a lot easier on 2019.4 and later. So I'm going to show you on 2019.4, but this is pretty standard. So I'll try to make a link for this or make a PDF and then put it in my drive or put it on GitHub, and then I'll link it down below. But basically, we're going to follow this setup instructions, and you should have already gotten your Azure ready, and now you should have your free account. So all we're going to do is just go ahead and go to virtual machines, and we're going to create a virtual machine. And in here, we're going to just select our Azure subscription 1, and then it's going to say, hey, you need a resource group. Let's go ahead and create a resource group. We'll just call it Pentest. You can call it whatever you want. And then I'm just going to call this OpenVPN. Actually, just OpenVPN like that. US East is fine. If you're somewhere else, go ahead and place your region there. And then it says, do you need any infrastructure? We don't need any of that. We're going to create a Ubuntu server at 18.04. That's perfectly fine. And then it's going to say, what size do you want? And we don't need a lot of resources for this. So I'm just going to choose a B1S here. B1S is just one CPU, 1 gigabyte of RAM, and then 2 disks. Super, super low. It'll come up and pull the cost per month estimate. It's super cheap, $759. So you won't run through your $200 if you're just using this the whole year. So go ahead and select this. And then it's going to say, hey, do you want an SSH public key, which is probably the safer route. I'm just going to go ahead and set up a password here. So go ahead and set up whatever password you want. I'll just say Heath is my username, and then we'll do something like, see if that works. That does. Okay, and then it's going to say, hey, what ports do you want to allow on this machine? We're going to go ahead and allow a few ports. So we're going to allow SSH, HTTPS, and HTTP. And then this is pretty good. We're going to go ahead and just click disks. Now, it's going to want you to have premium. We don't need premium. This does not need much resources. All we're doing is just making a connection out to this machine. So we're just handling a little bit of traffic here. We don't need a ton of resources on disk, and we don't need a fancy disk by any means. So standard hard disk is fine. And then we're going to go ahead and just move to next. And we're going to be under the networking section. So here, what we're going to say is we're going to go ahead and the standard subnet's fine of 10.0s. It's going to say, hey, public IP or static IP. Now, you could create new and make a static IP address. I'm not going to do this for this instance. I think you should. So go ahead and hit OK. And then you can utilize a static IP. But I'm just going to go ahead and use the OpenVPN public IP. And the reason is just I'm not going to create it statically. But for static purposes, you should, because otherwise, every time you shut down this box and restart it, it's going to pull a new IP address. Okay, so the rest of these are fine in terms of settings. And then go ahead and hit next. And we're actually going to just go ahead and scroll over to review and create here. And from review and create, we can go ahead and create the machine. So you can see that this is going to run us about a penny an hour. So not a lot. Pretty cheap in terms of machines, and like, what is that? 24 cents a day? That's next to nothing. Maybe 25 once that rounds up. So let's go ahead and create this. And while this is creating, it's going to take a little bit to spin up. So while it's creating, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and change some rules that we're going to need to make for the networking purposes. So let's go ahead and go home. Let's go over to virtual machines and see if it's there yet. And it's not. So go ahead and wait till your virtual machine's here. Keep refreshing. And then once your virtual machine spins up, go ahead and we'll pause the video here, then unpause the video and join me back. We'll go ahead and move forward with what network settings we need to do and how we're going to move forward on actually accessing this machine. So meet me here in a few minutes. All right, now that the machine is up, let's go ahead and click on the machine itself. And we can see some information here, like the public IP address. But before we do that, let's go ahead and go to networking. And in here, we need to add some rules. Actually, just one rule, which is an inbound port rule. We could say source of any, and then wildcard's fine, destination of any, and then the destination port range is going to go ahead and just be 1194. And we'll just call this port 1194. Just like this, say add. And we're going to change the protocol, to UDP, and then say add. And it's going to create that security rule for us. So what this is allowing us to do is it's allowing us to come in here and actually utilize OpenVPN, which uses port 1194 as an outbound rule. Okay, so here we go. Let's go back to overview. And you can see that the public IP address is 13.90.59.138. And what we can do is we can come into something like PuTTY. So if you bring over PuTTY like this, you could just say, hey, 13.90.59.138. On port 22, which is SSH, say open. It's going to prompt you this little security key. We'll just say yes. And you're going to say, hey, who do you want to log in as? And then I made my account Heath. I'll just give it my password really quick. And then it should log us in. It's going to be a little slow just because of the resources, but it shouldn't be too bad. Okay, so we are not root. So let's make sure we switch over to root. And let's grab our IP configuration. So let's just do IPA real quick. And you can see we are at 10.0.0.4 on this. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a quick wget command. Now this is going to be in the install guide, and in the install guide, there's actually a blog that is called How to Set Up OpenVPN Server in 5 Minutes on Ubuntu 18.04. So very straightforward, but we're going to go ahead and just pull this wget where we grab the OpenVPN install. And it's not wget, it is just wget. Okay, now we pulled it. We're going to chmod that, make it executable. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to run that. So we're just going to say OpenVPN. And it's going to say, hey, what's the public IP address? So this is where that static IP comes into play. but it's already giving it to us because it's identified it. So we're just going to hit enter. What protocol do we want to run on? We want to run on 1, already giving that to us, so it's fine. 1194. And then when it says what settings do we want, I use number 2. And then it says, hey, what's the client name of this? I just call it Dropbox. So let's call it Dropbox. And then press any key. Okay, and now it's setting this up for the first time. So you can come in here and you will have you'll have multiple files that you can generate. So this is a Dropbox file for the Dropbox itself, and then you'll create a second Dropbox or a second Dropbox file or OpenVPN file that you'll place for yourself, or you'll give to a pen tester, for example. And then you can create a OpenVPN file for every Dropbox that you have. So you can have Dropbox1.ovpn, Dropbox2.ovpn, etc. All right, so make sure that you understand that for every VPN or OpenVPN file you generate is for each Dropbox or each pen tester. And this just takes a second. And now you can see that it's been placed at root Dropbox.ovpn. Now these are the keys to the castle, so make sure that you secure these. For this example and what I'm doing, it's not very important, but just because I'm showing it on a video. But absolutely make sure if you're utilizing this that you don't just have your Dropbox.ovpn file sitting out where somebody can access it. So from here, we're going to go ahead and make sure that the OpenVPN runs on boot. So we're just going to say systemctl, and we're going to say enable OpenVPN. So if this machine's ever restarted, OpenVPN just boots up for us. Now we have 2 VPN files, or we have 1 VPN file now. If we want to create another VPN file, all we got to do is run the OpenVPN install sh, just like that. You could say, hey, add a new user, revoke a user, etc. I'm only going to do this for proof of concept, so I'm not going to generate a new user at this moment, but we can take a look at that later if we need to. So from here, we've got our VPN file. We're just going to go ahead and cat out the Dropbox.ovpn, and we're just going to copy this. Now, obviously, this is very, very secretive stuff. You don't want to share this with anybody. So let's go ahead and just copy this here. And of course, I just hit enter on that, or right click because I'm a noob. You're going to go ahead and just paste this into a file. So you can open up a notepad or notepad++ or whatever you want to do. I'm just going to paste it over here, and you'll have it just like this. So it'll look just like this. You can see it's going to connect out to this remote, this IP address, and then it's going to try to connect. So go ahead and save that file as like Dropbox.ovpn or whatever you want to call it, because we're going to put it on our Kali machine. So I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'm going to call it Dropbox.ovpn. Pretty straightforward. So from here, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and place this on the machine of our Kali Linux. And again, I'm using Kali 2019.4. If you want to use 2019.3 or earlier, you have to modify the GNOME settings and use LXDE, I think is what it used to be. So at least that's how I figured it out, and it was a little difficult. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to just make sure that we use 2019.4, and I'll show you the settings that we need to set up over there. Okay, so I am on the 2019.4 version of Kali. This is the first time I'm booting it up. All I've done is brought over Dropbox.ovpn. And the first thing we need to do is do a quick apt update. And then we're going to do a distribution upgrade as well, just to make sure that everything is in place. So we're going to run apt dist upgrade. And we'll just say yes on that. And what we need to do is we need to do a few things. So we need to move the RDP file into place. We also need to make sure that we do a install of XRDP or your RDP of choice. For me, I'm just going to use XRDP, and that's going to allow us to host an RDP server on this machine. So what's going to happen is we're going to connect, say, to a OVPN file from a Windows machine, just as an example. And on that Windows machine, we then are on the same network as this machine that connects to this OVPN file. And then from the Windows machine, I can say, hey, I just want to RDP into this interface, and I can go ahead and have a GUI to click around. Now, that could be too much for some of you. You could just have an SSH interface here if you wanted to and enable SSH. You can make this your own and do this however you want. You don't even have to run this in Azure. But just as how I use it, I just have OpenVPN file that I connect to either on another Kali machine or on my Windows machine and connect to it just like that. Another way I've seen this done is using something like shuttle and using a proxy and just connecting to it that way as well. So you've got a lot of different options that you can take. Now let's go ahead and open up a new tab while we're waiting on this. I'm just going to make this bigger. And we could take care of some settings while we're waiting for the upgrade to happen there. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to CD over to my desktop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over this Dropbox file into our Etsy OpenVPN. And then I'm going to put it as openvpn.conf, just like that. So now we've overwritten the OpenVPN file that's sitting in there. And what happens is when we boot this computer up, every single time we boot this computer up, this says, hey, go ahead and connect to this machine or connect over this OpenVPN file. So that's what we really want to do. So the next thing we're going to do is disable what I call sleepy times. It's completely optional. I just want to make sure that the computer doesn't fall asleep when it's at the client site. The very first time I was doing a Dropbox for a client, and it was my very first client, I could not figure out what was going on, and I had to keep telling him, hey, could you move the mouse because the computer fell asleep? And he thought it was funny, thankfully, not annoyed. But I'm going to go ahead and just paste this here, and just make sure that your system CTL is off, and you can see it copied half of a star. It looks like it copied something from the guide. Here we go. Make sure that your mask is set to 0, and it's just creating these symlinks and saying, hey, make sure all this stuff is suspended. This way that this machine never goes to sleep. Now you can set it into your settings as well. You can come into your settings up here and make sure that that your power settings are shut to off or never sleep, etc. I did that, but I still was seeing the computer fall asleep. So I went ahead and just ran this system CTL and went that route. Let's check on this as well. We're here, we're reading change logs. Looks like it's almost done. So I'm gonna go ahead and just stop it here. We'll let it pause and let this finish. It should just be another minute or two. So if you're still in the same place, go ahead and let this finish. Then we'll just make one more change and we'll test it out after that. Okay, so now that everything is updated, let's go ahead and install xfreeRDP. So we're going to say apt install xrdp, actually just xrdp, not xfreeRDP. Go ahead and just say yes. And that should just take another second to install here. And then we're just going to make a couple of minor changes to the actual RDP settings. So those are going to be the following. We're just going to say service xrdp start. This is just for us now. And then we're going to say also service xrdp session start, however you want to say that. And then we're going to say update -rc.d, and we're going to say xrdp enable. And what that's going to do, that's just like a sysctl. Okay, we'll do sysctl. System CTL enable xrdp. Okay, and that's going to be the same thing as we did on the other machine, the Ubuntu machine, where we just make sure that systemctl or we run xrdp on boot. That way, if this machine restarts, it will restart not only and connect to the OVPN, but it'll also enable RDP settings for us. So now we should have RDP open on this machine, and we could test this whole thing out. So let's do a quick ifconfig. You will see that we are on 192.168.57.147. That's perfect. I'm going to CD over to downloads. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do something like this. I'm going to say OpenVPN, and then I'm going to say Dropbox.ovpn, which won't work if I'm not on my desktop. So let's go to the desktop, and we'll OpenVPN the Dropbox.ovpn now. Okay, and we make the connection. So we are connected, and if we open up, actually we could just go to this tab over here, and we'll just do an ifconfig. You can see we are on 10.8.0.2. One small thing I forgot to add before I cut back to the clip is that we need to enable this on reboot. So we need to do a systemctl enable OpenVPN. So that allows OpenVPN to run on reboot, similar to what we have done before. So now that we've done all that, go ahead and just do a quick shutdown -R now and reboot your machine. And then meet me back once your machine is rebooted and you are logged in. Now for the moment of truth. We need to check our IP address here and see if we are actually on the OpenVPN. So if we do an ifconfig, you can see that we are automatically on the tunnel now. Now the other thing we need to check is we need to make sure that we can connect to this over RDP. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out of this machine here, and then I'm going to try to connect to it over the RDP. So all I'm going to do is bring this over. It's at 192.168.4.52, and I'm going to connect. It should bring up this Xorg screen, and I'm just going to say root tor here, log in, and there is our machine with the Dropbox and everything else. So that's it. Hopefully this was informative for you. I just wanted to show you one of many ways to do this. This isn't the only way, as I said in the beginning. This is just a way to do this. So if you want to remote into a box or you want to leave a quick Dropbox, start getting your wheels spinning. You can use OpenVPN in any sort of these situations. You can SSH, you can do all sort of cool things. So keep thinking about it, and hopefully this is a lesson learned. So until next time, my name is the Cyber Mentor, and I do thank you for joining me.